All right, so I am really excited to announce our next speaker. Her and I just communicated, like, I don't know, maybe a week ago.
Yeah.
And it's really been a great conversation. So Sophia is an aspiring woman in STEM and a huge advocate for gender equality, rising senior at High Tech High School, studying computer science. And Sophia knows, how difficult it can be for young women in STEM and science. And she just won a couple of awards, and I think I'll let you tell us about that. And just a really inspiring young person, and is currently in Washington, D.C. So, Sophia, without further ado, over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Berg, and thank you for everyone who is here today. I'm very excited to get to talk to you guys about some tips and some tricks to level up your advocacy, level up any work that you're doing in terms of gender equality, community outreach, and anything of that nature. As per the awards that Mr. Berg was mentioning, I was recently selected as an Engineer Girl Ambassador. Actually, I say recently because our conference was recently, where we got to travel to California to meet these executives and other strong female STEM leaders from all across the nation. But my work with that as one of the 24 Engineer Girl Ambassadors has taught me a lot about what it means to be a youth advocate, and I'm excited to get started with you guys. So are we sharing content at the moment on screen?
All right, I will share my screen. I was just waiting for you to give me the cue.
All right.
All right, so how's that?
Yeah,
Can you see it?
awesome. That's
Okay.
great. Yeah. Alrighty. So, what qualifies me, a teen girl outside of New York City, to tell you all about how you can be youth advocates for gender equality? Well, it encapsulates lots of factors. First being, as I mentioned, one of 24 of the nation's Engineer Girl Ambassadors, which is a program run by the National Academy of Engineering that helps promote young women entering STEM fields. I'm also the founder and president of my school's United Nations Girl Up chapter, which has been a county-wide success. Now, throughout the way, I've picked up so many tips and tricks that can help anyone on their own advocacy journey. So whether you want to start a chapter of an already acknowledged organization like Girl Up or Model UN, if you want to begin your own leadership organization, this is the place to be to get started. So as a biracial woman looking to enter a STEM field, I'm very excited about bringing more young women to the table. And if we can move to the next slide, please. All right, so we will be covering a variety of topics today. First, we'll be addressing the issue and talking about why it's so important for the youth to outreach and why it's so important for us to take the first step forward to change situations. Next is the cycle of advocacy, which is a format that I have curated for a lot of teams that I've worked with, that is very much based on Girl Up and the United Nations, their plan and strategy when it comes to advocacy and fighting for the causes we believe in. And then we will be going over some sample projects that have been successful for me, and I think you might be interested in as well. All right, next, please. All right, so the first thing you should do when you're addressing your issue is tackling your game plan. Are you going to be online or are you going to be in person? Do you want to focus on getting projects done, or would you rather spend time reaching out to your community? The possibilities of how you go about addressing the problems in your community are endless, but it's so important to have a set game plan of things you want to do. Going back to the example of Girl Up, they give their club leaders monthly plans and challenges for them to focus on. And keep in mind, while set formats also work well, and it's obviously very important to have an organized, structured plan, as I just mentioned, You're allowed to venture from your set plan once it's been established. The important thing is that you have a guideline, but you're allowed to improvise. And oftentimes, I find that improvisation, especially in community organization projects, often come in and save the day. All right, next slide, please.
Sorry.
No, you're all good. Thank you. All right, so when our team works on helping others, they're building up their own personal skill set, which then contributes how they interact in a professional environment. So what do I mean? What do I mean when I say this? I mean that when you build up your community and you strengthen the people around you and you train them in order to properly go out into the world and do these wonderful projects, they're not only creating an impact. Say if you did a project that donated hats and gloves to a homeless shelter, they're not only giving to people in that said shelter, but they're also giving to themselves. Another example is when we talk about gender equality, we have to think about the greater impacts of the work that is done, and fostering community and creating safer spaces for women everywhere is very important and needs dedicated set time. Advocacy strengthens a girl's ability to speak up for herself, and peers tend to demand a change from her superiors. And this can range from a simple tweet to following an advocacy curriculum, such as the one that Girl Up provides for its members. And everything can be a learning experience when properly executed. Fundraising not only promotes allocating money to the places that need it the most, but it can provide young women with the financial literacy that they're often denied in public school systems. And this becomes of even greater importance to women of color, who so often come from these underrepresented communities in which financial literacy and financial education is not widely available. Storytelling promotes being open and honest about our experiences as women and being willing to hear and learn from others about their own. It also encapsulates public speaking skills and even networking ideas. Being that women are so often left out of the conversation, these opportunities we have bring them back in. And organizing for change means motivating girls to get involved and get started in the first place. When we do this work, we are feeding and nurturing the environment that we created in the first place. Your group and the people you are leading will benefit from the projects that you organize. Next, please. So now we will be talking about the aforementioned cycle of advocacy I spoke about. And we can move on to the next slide. And it consists of three main ideas, which is learning, training, and leading. Over time, we've kind of come to realize that when you teach a lot of young girls and a lot of young students in general about something, then they want to be able to apply it. Or the flip side of that is when you ask students to apply something that they don't know a lot about, the work often doesn't necessarily come from the heart or come from a place of understanding. And so that's why it's important to have both of these aspects when working with youth service groups. My time as Girl Up president has taught me that no thanks to the educational divide in our nation, we're facing a huge lack of information concerning the different types of issues that our generation needs to tackle. And it's why I adopted Girl Up's model of learning, training, and leading. It's so important to first learn about the range of issues that you wish to advocate for. And this can include reaching out to mentors and asking them questions, doing independent research, and even via firsthand experiences. There's a lot of opportunities to learn. It's just a matter of seeking them out. And again, like I mentioned, it doesn't have to be this great show of things. There's a lot of free resources online. One of the things we got out of the pandemic, one of the few, we faced so many negatives, but one of the few things that did come from it was that so many platforms were moved online, such as this conference that we're, at right now. I wouldn't have necessarily known about it had, we not had, communities like kind of come together and promote these kinds of events. So really pushing for these free online programs is very, very helpful. From then, discussion and goal setting helps us to train and execute a certain project, kind of touching on what I mentioned before. You can't have one without the other. And some topics that you can cover include gender equity, education, gender-based violence, sexual reproductive health, very important, especially now with everything that's going on, mental health, and the gender gap in STEM, gender gap in sports, and more. Once you've completed a service project, you can then start this process again. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so now we're going to be going over some sample projects that I found to have been successful in the past, and hopefully you will be able to enjoy and apply as well. Next, please. Awesome. All right. So I'm going to start off by talking about one of my earliest service projects I did when I was still a member of a lot of these community groups, and something I still do today. Are drives. So whether that be toy drives, I did a toy drive with Girl Up around Christmas time, excuse me, and we collected around 90 toys for our local community homeless shelters. But whether that's hygiene kits, I mentioned before, hats and gloves. Recently, a lot of communities are gathering resources for the humanitarian effort in Ukraine. And so these, you can rally your group and you can tell them, all right, we're going to pack X amount of kits today, X amount of hats and gloves today. And, putting a motivator out there for students, letting them know, like, if our group completes X amount of items for this drive, we will then celebrate afterwards, and making sure that students know exactly where the materials they're collecting, purchasing, materials that they are fundraising for. Drives are great because they can encapsulate a lot of like the leadership, aspects that are so important to have these days. And so aforementioned financial literacy drives help with that as well. And what's really impactful about having these toy drives or even these food drives is that once students, finish their project, they know, why they're doing the work that they're doing. If said drive is successful, it really helps to up. It's a really great, thing to put on your group's resume. It's always good to have a log or a journal of all the accomplishments that you've completed with your group. So that way, when you outreach and network with other individuals, you can tell them, I'm the leader of X group, and I've, one of our biggest, most recent projects was that we collected Y amount of items for this event, or for this cause. So drives are really great. And while they can seem a bit overwhelming at first, never be afraid to start small and work your way up. Next is social media. As long as we're responsible and as long as we're kind and courteous to others, social media can be a great tool in advocacy. So whether that's spreading information about something that matters that matters a lot to your group, spreading information about a project that you have recently started, or speaking out, having your students profile on your Instagram page. We did a thing with our Girl Up chapter where we showcase every member and something else that they did, something that they were passionate about, and that really helped to get people excited and looking forward to it. Next is educating the youth. It's important to keep students engaged. Don't be afraid to think outside the box and do the unexpected. And when I say educating the youth, I'm not just specifically talking about the students within your group, but I'm talking about connecting with younger generations of students, especially the elementary school years are so crucial in deciding, in helping a student decide, what they want to do going forward. What are the issues that matter most to them? What are they passionate about? And so, like with my work with Engineer Girl and the National Academy of Engineering, we strived to outreach to young girls from underrepresented communities to help remove a bit of that intimidation that science and technology and math often carries, and letting them know that they're capable of big things as well. And this not only is a great service project, but it really helps to connect with the youth. Again, going back to that connection, going back to those interpersonal relationships that are so crucial, it's very important to also outreach and network online. There are millions of resources, millions of universities, and millions of organizations that have well-established individuals who now want to give back to their community, now want to give back to younger generations. And so reaching out to somebody, shooting them an email, writing to a teacher and being like, I'm looking for somebody who's a specialist in environmental climate justice. Do you happen to know anybody? And more often than not, somebody knows somebody who knows somebody, right? And so that can really help up your game, really help if you can bring in a guest speaker. And really, if you sit down and chat with somebody about the work that they're doing, it can really give you ideas for your future projects. So highly encourage that as well. Speaking up out and against the things that matter most to you is obviously very important. Being willing to protest, to advocate, to go to your local rallies, or telling your students that from home they can sign petitions and surveys. Again, things are online now, and so there's so many resources. Looking up petitions for X issue, and you'll be able to find dozens of hopefully things to help out. And finally, there are events, special conferences, special networking events where you can go to and speak to these individuals, and let them know that you're representing a group of young students working for a certain cause. And these are really opportunities to get to meet other people as well. So we can move on to our next slide. And I just want to thank everybody for joining in today. This is such a crucial time in our society to really start up and make change. We're in the summer right now. It gives you a lot of time to plan for your next service group, for your next service project, for leading a group of young individuals to do great things. I'm happy to take any questions if they're in chat. If anybody, I don't know how Mr. Berg, you do the questions, you guys manage the questions here, but I'm happy to do that if anybody does.
Yeah, we're just going to use the raise your hand function. So again, if anybody has a question, please use the raise your hand function. Just go to reactions and you'll see it'll say raise hand. And so we can see your hand and we can call on you and you can get your question answered. Looks like Janine. Janine, go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Sophia, and thank you, Peter. I was wondering about the little bit more like the nuts and bolts of the curriculum, and if you have anything in your organization that you think would be a good sort of start-off point for anybody that feels like, I know what the right thing to do is, I know what the right thing to say is, but is there a more responsible, more robust curriculum to kind of advocate, to be able to advocate these issues?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for your question. So I'd say in terms of a curriculum, right, nothing has to be necessarily so strict and set out, right? What I often recommend a lot of people to do when they ask me, like, where do I get started? Where do I, how do we get a game plan? Is first of all, as I mentioned, online resources, looking for how to even doing a quick Google search and going like, how do I teach my students about, gender equality, right? There's dozens of resources there. And then from that, you kind of pick and choose what you like, and you pick and choose what's accessible to you, right? Some organizations and some, educational establishments will have a certain number of resources. And so you really have to play around with what you have. I also recommend that, have conversation-based discussion, and sort of in those moments, like ideas kind of come out and people jump off of each other's points. And from those conversations, you can then, take some time, sit down with an empty doc and kind of write some key points that some students were interested in. And from then, that at least, they'll be motivated because, they were passionate about a certain issue, if that makes sense. But yeah, definitely first step is always going online and looking for ideas there. It really also depends on what you're interested in. So yeah, of course.
Thanks.
Yeah, if you have a question, go ahead and use the raise your hand function. So actually, as we're waiting for that, Sophia, I have a question. So I know that you are currently in Washington, D.C., and you kind of said what it was about. But I'm wondering, are what you presented today and what you're doing in DC, are they kind of in lockstep? Is it kind of similar or different kinds of things going on there?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I am an engineer girl with the National Academy of Engineering. And so where we did our program was at our local library. And so I've always been very involved in our, library community and the work that they do. I always believe that, libraries are a place of knowledge and of a place of spreading information whenever possible. And having the opportunity to go to, their conference and get to speak to all these writers and creators and publishers, also, as I mentioned before, these big conferences, these big events, you always take ideas, you always meet people who are very helpful there, and you tell them about the work that you're doing. And so it's very exciting to, have the opportunity to speak to, people from all over. And it's not necessarily something that you have to travel to do. It's something that you can, send an email to somebody about. So
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of
Samantha.
course.
Yeah, I heard you mention Girl Up. I guess that's kind of an organization that sort of helps get framework for advocacy. Are you aware of other organizations that are similar to Girl Up, or have you just mainly worked with them?
Yeah, so thank you for your question. Girl Up is a subdivision of the United Nations, as I mentioned before, and they are very complex in the work that they do, because not only do they do work individually, but they help, get, young girls like a starting point if they want to establish their own club. And so while they cater necessarily to gender equality, there's a lot of other organizations like Girls Who Code, Girls Inc. And then with the United Nations, there's also Model UN. There's another organization I recommend to people that's nationwide, and I'm also a part of in our regional level, which is the Junior State of America. And these are all programs that not only support young individuals who are willing to, do work, but they also, really push for that education aspect, which I feel is often the missing key in a lot of volunteerism, is that people do activities, but not necessarily with the knowledge of, what activities they're doing and why they're doing it. Another one I could recommend is, the Jefferson Awards. They do a lot of like service leadership work, and, they help promote volunteerism with a cause, and multiplying good is another one. So yeah, lots of things online. I promise that there's never a shortage of these kinds of organizations.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
You can go ahead and use the raise your hand function if you have a question. So actually, Sophia, I think, you and I have chatted a little bit, and so part of our organization, I mean, what we do is we really promote learner-directed, learner-centered educational alternatives. So it's interesting. I know you were talking about you are a public school student currently, but a lot of kind of the things that you do sound like a lot of self-direction, right? So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that a lot of what you're doing seems like kind of outside of school, and the things you're talking about, or is that part of school too? I guess that's the first question. Is it part of, and then what do you think about this self-directed path that you're on?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm always a huge advocate for, taking advantage of any opportunity that your educational institution presents to you. And so I'd say, definitely in elementary school and in middle school, when they would have, fundraisers or events, I feel like that really got me started into like wanting to reach out and help others. But then from there on out, I'd say, during the pandemic, there was a lot of, extra time for me to go exploring for these organizations, as I mentioned before. And so, yeah, I think a lot of it is self-directed, but I would say that for a lot of students, it's very easy to get your group to be excited about something on their own without a teacher, pushing them, and, hopefully to get inspired in the same way that I'm constantly inspired by people's stories. When executed correctly, you can really get a group of people, and you can really get the individual, which I guess is, a very important focus, to make sure that every individual is, in the team is, feeling good and confident. it's very easy to get somebody inspired just with a story, and so I feel like storytelling and listening and always having an open mind to all these different ideas really helped me, decide I want to go beyond the curriculum and I want to explore things on my own. So yeah, thank
Awesome.
you.
Kay, go ahead, and that's probably going to be our last question.
Well, Sophia, I am so impressed by everything you're doing and love all the things that you're saying. I think my question
Thank you.
is, we have a lot of students who are disengaged, in regular school, or they don't have the opportunities that other people have, or they aren't invited in. How do we reach those students, that they don't have families behind them, or they don't have transportation, or they have to go home and babysit, or they have to go to a job, or they've never had the kind of mindset that you have? And how do we reach those students and give them these opportunities?
Right. Thank you so much for your question. I feel like that's very, it's very important for us to make sure that when we do these service projects, we are, like I mentioned, nurturing the community that is giving back, if that makes sense. So in giving, we are also, learning ourselves. And so I'd say there's two big answers to that question. And one is the technical aspect, as you mentioned, things such as transportation, financial issues, and logistics that really make it impossible at times for many students to participate in such events. And from there, I'd say the first starting point, especially for me, was finding other organizations that supported these groups. And even within my own community, reaching out to certain individuals who I know, might have known somebody who was interested in said topic that I was doing, and being like, listen, I have a group of students, but because of the logistics, it's hard. How do we make this work? Do you have any resources? Do you have any scholarships I can apply to? Do you have any grants? The Engineer Girl program, one of the biggest benefits that was given to us was a $250 grant, which was a nice springboard into, really doing the work that we wanted to do. And I'd say that the second big aspect, to answer your question, is I'd say the emotional part, which is getting students who may not necessarily always be, mentally engaged in such activities, or may not have the particular interest. And I'd say that once you've got your logistics lined up, once you've reached out to the individuals who may be able to fund or help or assist, then it's really time to put that to work. It's really, sometimes it's about enforcing things, sometimes it's about printing 50 flyers for an event and really putting it out there to let students know. Also, like I mentioned before, focusing on an individual, and really, getting one more student in a room is better than having no extra student, right? And so it's a good, even if you keep nagging someone, if you keep sending them an email, eventually people do, it might pique their interest. And also incorporating fun into it, a little bit of laughter and a little bit of, extra spunk never hurt anybody. And so letting people know that this isn't some place that you're going to be sitting down and talking or sitting down and working. It's going to be a place where, it's going to be a good time. So yeah. Lots of different ways to tackle, but I wish you and your organization the best of luck, and I'll put my email in the chat towards the end in case anybody has any extra questions as well.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
of course.
much. Thank you,
Yeah.
Sophia, so much for making time for us. I know that you're really busy this weekend, but
No, my pleasure.
if you can drop into some other chats that you might be interested, you have the link with all the sessions. So if there's anything that you feel like, hey, that might be cool, we'd love to have you join us. So if you could do that, that would be awesome. And I'm gonna go
Yeah,
ahead
of
and
course.
stop the recording here.